According to scientists at the National Institute of Health, autoimmune disease is on an exponential incline. Often, these illnesses are met with a plethora of immune-suppressing drugs, horrible side effects, and sadly, a bleak future ahead. But today on Road to Recovery, we're going to be talking to someone that not only overcame 7 of her own autoimmune illnesses, but did it all with focusing on one thing: what she put into her mouth. Her name is Shannon, better known online as Autoimmune Foodie, and nowadays you can find her helping others overcome their autoimmune ailments using something called the Wahls Protocol. The questions we're going to be answering today: how does somebody develop an autoimmune disease in the first place? What's wrong with our current treatment paradigm for these illnesses? And how can you incorporate these food principles into your own healthcare routine? And hey, if you're enjoying the podcast, make sure to hit the subscribe button and notification bell so that you don't miss any of the amazing guests that we have coming up on the show. And with that, let's just jump right into it. Shannon, thank you so much for taking the time to just sit down and let me kind of pick your brain, because I know you have this like vast amount of knowledge that I just want to get in there and kind of suck some of it out and reverse osmosis it through my body and see if I can retain any of it. But thank you for taking the time. And so it's no question, we talked about you in the intro here before the podcast, and you're a very experienced nutritional therapy practitioner. You've been around the block. You're bulletproof approved, you're galup diet approved, you're Wahls Diet approved, and you've overcome yourself 7 autoimmune diseases, which is no easy feat, I may add. Overcoming one is extremely difficult in and of itself. Yeah. So I think you and your story offer a lot of hope to people out there. But before we kind of get into your healing journey for yourself, I kind of wanted to talk about the growing prevalence of autoimmune disease in our society. It seems to be becoming more and more, well, prevalent. I just said it. But I kind of wanted to pick your brain about why you think that is the case and why more and more people are being diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis or Hashimoto's and things like this.
Well, I think that's a great question. I'll say I'm not an expert on that topic, but having sort of obsessively researched autoimmunity for going on 7 years, I really think that, first of all, I know people love a simple answer. I don't think there's a simple answer with things like autoimmunity and cancer, even when we know we've had a major stressor like Lyme disease or heavy metal poisoning or something like that. I think there's still an interplay, right, of genetics and environment. If you look at someone like me with really screwy genetics, my parents have the exact same set of genetics. They're in their 80s and they're in perfect health. So we know that genetics just don't dictate everything. We know that epigenetics is important. So then we look at the environment, what's changing in our environment, our food additives, our chemicals, the toxins we're exposed to, EMF, the amount of stress. I mean, when you really study the westernized world across cultures and I don't know if you just lost me. I lost myself there, but our stress is going up and up and up. We value busyness. And, we pride ourselves on pushing ourselves and lack of sleep. So I think when we take all of the foundations of well-being and we look at all the, in my mind, there's 7 main areas of well-being. When we look at all of those, they're all getting more and more toxic over time. I think that's why we have diseases like autoimmune, and cancer on the rise.
Yeah, no, I would definitely tend to agree. One thing that I've noticed is that, like you mentioned, health and well-being and vitality are not black and white things that so often in the medical community or even like the wellness community like to pitch when they're selling products. These things they're these black and white dogmatic things, and it's really not. It's really individualized, and I think that's why you bring a certain level of freshness to that wellness community, because you offer a more in-depth experience to figuring out what triggers you may be experiencing that are contributing to your autoimmune disease or neurological developmental disease. et cetera. Because like you mentioned, even with things like cancer, and they're finding these things with Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, that there's so many factors that play into the disease process that more than likely 2 people could have Alzheimer's, for instance, could be for 2 different underlying issues. I myself have struggled, as people know on the podcast, with certain neurological problems, and I have also screwy genes. I get a wonderful, terrible detox pathway from my compound heterozygous MTHFR. So I shouldn't have probably eaten tuna every day for 4 years, and that probably wasn't helpful. So I think that we also need to take into account, like you mentioned, epigenetics, and whether or not these genes we have, like you mentioned, my parents also have the same genes. I got it from them, and they're doing fine. So you got to look at the environmental factors, the stress, all of these things that are going to play into whether or not you develop something, because you could have MTHFR. And I know a lot of people freak out about MTHFR, and that's not necessarily a topic for today's podcast, but you could have it and it may not even be active. Like, you may be totally fine. Your methylation may be fine and you don't even know, or mine could not be working, and that requires testing to figure out. But I think a great place to start for people to become more familiar with you and kind of why you've even gotten into this space is starting with your story, and how by 2014 you were successful in your business life, your professional life, but you were also at the same time, for lack of a better term, kind of dying. Like, your life was also falling apart. So let's start.
I was literally, I think I was literally dying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how did that all kind of begin for you, and where did you find this new path with more of a, well, again, for lack of a better term, holistic route into healing as much as you can, you know?
Yeah, such a great question. I actually sat down to write a blog a number of years ago, just kind of chronicling my story up until 2014, and it ended up being like 50 something pages. And I realized it was actually the start of a book. And so that is on my website, but I'll try to bullet point it, right? So, I was diagnosed with my first autoimmune disease when I was like 12, 13 years old, with endometriosis. That started a 30+ year struggle of chronic pain, disability. I mean, I don't know if that people that haven't struggled with it or aren't familiar with it understand what a terribly, terribly debilitating disease it is. But I follow Dr. Wahls and Dr. Terry Wahls, and I've heard her say a couple times lately that they're seeing things like infertility and endometriosis as very, very potentially early indicators of sorry, my light went off, of future autoimmunity. That wasn't known back, years ago. So, for me, disease very early on meant shame, hide, don't let anybody know you're sick, you're weak, you're different. I have a lot of complex feelings and trauma around being ill, but, with endometriosis, that was years of surgeries. By the time I was 35, I had to have a hysterectomy, and still for 8 years after that, I was in a tremendous amount of pain, took a lot of painkillers. It was virtually, it was a disability at times. It was so bad. So that was first. In my 20s, I was then diagnosed with, I stopped sleeping, had horrific sleep problems with narcolepsy and something called periodic movement disorder. Both of those disorders prevent you from ever going into deep levels of sleep. I know you're a biohacker, so you understand if you never, ever, ever one night of your life get into stage 3 or 4 sleep, your life is wrecked. If you've ever stayed up all night cramming for an exam, or, you don't get a night of sleep, that's one of these disorders every day for your entire life, and you never once get a nap or catch up sleep, nothing. That was really maybe the worst, one of the worst, maybe other than cancer, the worst thing I've ever faced was the sleep disorders. I also got around that time, got Lyme disease. I was treated for it. It was caught early. I just listened to your episode with Beth Schultz, who I just adore. Yeah, our stories are so similar in the whole Lyme disease journey, but very much similar story. I was treated for it, but I wasn't really followed for it, and now it's borderline chronic and has been. Let's see. Then I started having GI issues, so I developed severe gastroparesis, where you can eat, and a day or two later, the food is still in your stomach. You end up throwing it back up. I developed severe gastritis, severe colitis. I would end up in the ER with hemorrhaging colon. I'd have a foot and a half of ulcerated colon, and they'd say, okay, you got to go home and drink broth. And if you don't, we're going to have to reset your colon. Ended up with, as that continued into my 40s, it was, autoimmune thyroiditis, so hypothyroid, some sort of autoimmune. They didn't call it Hashimoto's. I'm not sure why. And then it was fibromyalgia. And about this time I was desperate. I had severe neuropathy. I had a nerve conduction test. Nah, you've lost all this nerve conduction. We don't know why. We don't know why your stomach's a mess. I had so many doctors. I had, cardiologists and hematologists. I was anemic and I had all kinds of strange blood. No one could figure it out. So went to Mayo Clinic for 2 weeks. I went to Rochester, spent 2 weeks between the GI and the OB-GYN departments. And after 2 weeks of extensive testing, I left there with a cookbook and a diagnosis of IBS. And I think that is so common. It's just like, we don't know what's wrong with you. We don't know how to help you. Even though you have antibodies to gluten in your blood in our own, labs that we're handing you, we're still recommending this high grain Mediterranean type diet for you. So
welcome to the system.
That was disappointing. Yeah. So, I continued to deteriorate. I had a GI doctor say, well, let's just inject your stomach wall with pain-killing shots just to try to numb some of your pain. And I thought, there's got to be a better way. So then, it was fibromyalgia, and then I was pushing through, but I was very, 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 very sick. And I had a corporate job. I started my career as a psychologist, and I loved that. And then I moved into the corporate world, and I was climbing the corporate ladder, and I was in training and management, very successful. And what I had learned early on is just push through. Disease, you're not, I'm very stubborn. You're not going to stop me. I'm going to run over you. Denial. The biggest thing I've learned is I had no relationship with my body. I had no communication with my body. I ignored all of that. That's okay. That's how I survived. But it really pushed myself to the point that I was in a training. I was training about 300 people in Denver, and people were coming up to me, and they were literally saying, you don't look well. And I was saying, I'm okay. I really wasn't feeling well, but I'm okay. And finally, 2-3 different people said, no, you look like you need to go to the hospital. Do we need to call an ambulance? And I'm like, don't be crazy. And then I collapsed in front of all those people. I literally collapsed into the hospital. And they said, a heartbeat away from having probably a fatal cardiac event. So, and they sent me I was in the hospital for a while in the cardiac ICU, and they sent me to a rheumatologist. And I thought, I don't know what my heart has anything to do with rheumatology, but that's when I was diagnosed with systemic lupus. Wow. And as that journey went on, it was my fibromyalgia, you couldn't really touch me. It felt like a cattle prod. My heart was affected, my lungs, my blood, whole system. It was just cascading. And my rheumatologist, you go every 3 months and you look for the autoimmune antibodies. Like, is it attacking your, which organs now? And I remember the day, and it was progressing pretty quickly, that my rheumatologist said something to the effect of, I can give you a heart or a lung transplant because, you've got heart and lung involvement, but you're showing antibodies to your DNA now, and I can't give you a DNA transplant. So we don't have a choice. We have to start chemo. We have to start steroids. Here's the infusion room. You'll be coming here for life, and we will try to slow the inevitable, but you are progressing. And, it gave me the impression that, I may not be around in 5 years. I was 44 years old. So I had in my head that by the time I was 50, I may be dead. I sort of accepted that. Didn't want to do the chemo and steroids, but I could not find any alternative options. So I sat on that and I was totally disabled. So I quit working. I just reconciled my life was over. And then, so my husband and I decided to go on vacation. Think about this. So we went on vacation and I spent the entire week in the bed. I was too sick to read. I was too sick to get up. I was too sick to walk outside. I was too sick to do nothing. And that was rock bottom. So we came home and I said, I'm going to cry. I said, I'll do anything. I'll try anything because I'm stubborn. And I really believed in the medical system. And I believed if they couldn't help me, I wasn't going to be able to be helped. And he said, well, it's funny. I bought you a book 8 months ago and I know how stubborn you are. And I knew you wouldn't believe it. But I believe that you'll do anything. So he whips out the Wahls Protocol. And he's right. I would have said, this is ridiculous. And my doctors, if this would work, somebody would have told me. I mean, but I have no alternative. And he had heard about it on Dave Asprey's Bulletproof show. And I've told Dave this. I always used to say, he's so full of shit. That's what I always said. He's just so full of shit. So anyway, I said, okay, I'm going to give this 5 years. I mean, I read the book and I went, oh, well, this is actually science. This makes sense to me. I understand what she's saying. And I get that this is a process. I'm going to do this. And I have my journal right over here on my bookshelf. And I said, I wrote down the date. It was August 14, 2014. And I said, I wrote down 5 years from there. And I'm not giving up until I hit 5 years. Do you know? At 5 years, and then there's a whole nother story there in that chunk. But not only had I been off medicine and symptom free it's within a year, I was in remission from everything. Within 18 months, I stopped all my meds. And so here I am, 4 years after that. No lupus, no endometriosis, no narcolepsy. I'm not taking fistfuls of pills and immune suppressants. I used to wear Parkinson's patches to stop my movement disorder. It's all gone. And at year 5, I actually stopped testing positive for autoimmune antibodies, which is why I claim cure. And people can argue that. That's fine. I'm comfortable saying cure because if all the diagnostic criteria are gone and have been gone for years, and all the labs that you diagnosed me with are now normal, I don't know how I could have autoimmunity. I believe that I am cured. And in that 5 years, I literally, my entire life, 24/7 has been obsessively studying health and wellness. So I did all kinds of biohacking. But the good news is, and the thing that I preach, and anytime somebody says, will you come on my show? I say yes, because I want the story out there. Bodies can heal. And no one, there's not a person alive that has the magic wand or the crystal ball for you that can say, I see your future, or I'm going to wave this thing and this is the way. But I believe there is a way, a path to healing for every body, at least to some degree. I believe bodies want to heal. I believe they can heal. And maybe no two journeys look the same. But what's so interesting, I think, about my story is that I healed from everything I listed for you, and then a bunch more, Lyme and chronic EBV and kinds of things, all at the same time with the same plan.
I can't help but kind of get emotional listening to you talk about, because it kind of brings me back to, if anyone didn't watch, we were talking before the podcast about the Beth Schultz podcast that we did on the podcast about probably a month ago, and her story being very reminiscent of your own healing journey and finding health through the Wahls Protocol, and this really strong belief that our bodies can heal from these insane health diagnoses. And if it's people like you, Shannon, and people like Beth, and people like Terry Wahls, who I've had the pleasure of interviewing as well, that really proved to me just how amazing the human body is. Because I don't want to talk about myself on the podcast too much, but just hearing your story and all these people that I've had on the podcast the last several months, I myself have small fiber neuropathy, peripheral neuropathy, stuff like that, which I kind of attribute to my past eating disorder tendencies and other environmental factors, stress, which we'll talk about, and heavy metals and all these different factors. But there are times where I feel like people that are going through these immense
hurdles, and I can't even compare mine to yours or some others out there, that you just feel like when you're going through the system of getting these constant diagnoses, that you feel utterly helpless. And I hate that feeling, and I hate when I see other people like giving up because they're told that they can't do anything about what's going on. And I feel like it really discourages people from looking at alternatives that, I mean, once you're in the depths of it, it's like, what do you got to lose? I mean, where you were at, you were basically, you know what, I'm going to try this. And the other thing that really stood out to me during your story was this commitment to, hey, I have all this crap. I'm going to do this protocol for 5 years strictly and see what it does. I'm going to adhere to it, because I often think of it like this. How many years have many of us that develop these problems, maybe later in our life? It's more common, as if you look up autoimmune disease, it's more common to develop it later in your life, even though it's becoming more and more common for young people, as we're seeing. But think how many years it takes to develop all these problems, to gain these toxicities, or have these stressful life, chronic stressful life moments, that you really need to take that amount of time or so to really fix the processes in your body. And some people could do it faster, other people it takes longer. But I think the key is the commitment to time. And that's why Terry Wahls in her protocol really says, like, hey, you need to do this for at least 100 days to see any sort of physiological change. And I think people get really, I mean, we live in this constant world of, hey, we have everything at a click of a button. We want to be fixed today. That's why so many people go to pain medication. I don't want to down medication or immune suppressing drugs, because some people, you know, you need them at some point in your process before you can take them out. Everyone's at a different point in their healing journey. But we just want this instant gratification in some sense. And, you know, nothing good ever comes quickly. And that's like anything I've learned in my short time here on the planet, is that anything that's really good takes time and persistence to achieve. So I think, if anything, if people only watch the first part of this podcast, I can't think that they won't go away with some form of hope, no matter what you're dealing with. I think you can take away something special. So I kind of want to get into now a little more of the nitty gritty with you.
Sure.
Into biohacking, because there may be people out there that have heard of the term biohacking, or Dave Asprey, who's like one of the original biohacker people that I at least came across. So maybe we can. What is your definition of biohacking, and what does that mean for people that maybe don't know?
You know, I wish I had written down, I did a podcast a few weeks ago, and they asked me, you know, you want me to define biohacking. So I had done all this research from like the original definition, what it's evolved to. I mean, the truth is what it originally meant and what it means today are not the same thing. And also it's almost like a catch-all. I mean, people use it in many different ways. I mean, really, DIY biology, I think, is the simplest thing to say. We can't control all the factors that play into our lives and how we feel. But I think when most people talk about biohacking, what we're talking about is controlling the factors we can control in the effort to impact the outcome of what our biology is doing. So I think I like just the most simple DIY biology. I saw that somewhere on Google. We're just trying to affect our own health and well-being by controlling the factors that can be controlled. One thing that I think happens a lot with biohacking is people immediately think pills, potions, gadgets, and gizmos, right? They immediately think the high-tech, super expensive, all of that. I believe very, very, very strongly that the foundations of health are most important, and that you can't fancy your way out of poor foundations. It's like building a beautiful home on a cracked foundation. You don't do it, right? You have to have a solid foundation. So I really like to talk about, in my niche, and the thing I'm most passionate about is those foundations. You can always add, you know, the pills and the potions and the gadgets and the gizmos as icing on the healthy, gluten-free, sugar-free cupcake, right? But people have to have their foundations in order. And this is going to what you were saying. You can't just go take a pill and you're going to be cured from lupus, or go get an ozone therapy and you're not going to have Lyme anymore. I mean, maybe, I don't know. I know there's like outliers out there that did one thing, but most of us have to have our foundations of health in order. And that's the thing that I always want people to sort of hear.
No, that's really, really, really important. I think, I mean, it's the fundamentals. It's kind of like when you're going into a new exercise routine, for anyone out there that's into exercise like myself. You can't do a deadlift without proper form. And so it's about learning the fundamentals of form. It's the same way with diet and nutrition. You need to learn the fundamentals of what you need to do before you start adding, like you mentioned, all these potions and pills and gadgets and all this stuff. Or like, I got this infrared sauna behind me. If I just did that and I still ate a bunch of crap all the time, this is probably like, sure, I might feel okay in there, but it's not going to do what it's probably meant to do if I'm just filling my body with more toxins. You do have a toxin load limit, which I found out with tuna, which was fun.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
That's a very important thing to mention. So maybe we can jump into, I mean, you mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, your 7 pillars of wellness or vitality and health. So what are those 7 pillars, and which ones do you believe you need to have really firmly rooted before you start maybe adding some of these gadgets and pills and all this stuff, targeted supplementation?
Yeah, so actually, I just had a designer do a graphic for me, so I'm looking at it. So this is from my research. I also have a partner who's one of my dearest friends, and she and I have gone through all of our coaching certifications together. We met at Galup, and then we went through Bulletproof and all of this stuff. And so this is collaborative research, really. But so we really feel like, the foundation is knowing your why. What we call occupational well-being, which is, do you have a purpose? Do you have a thing that occupies most of your time that you're passionate about, that is your reason for living? We could go into Viktor Frankl, or we can go down a lot of different roads. But I think it's important to know that that occupational well-being isn't necessarily your career. For many of us, career, like for me, this is what gives me purpose. This is my why, spreading the gospel of hope and healing, and how you go about that. But it can be child rearing. It can be a hobby. It can be volunteer work. You are not going to get where you're going if you don't have a why to get there. So that's our first one. And then we go into physical well-being, which we really break into eating, moving, sleeping. It's hard to biohack your way out of poor eating, moving, and sleeping. And then we go into mind, spirit, which is a particular love of mine, coming from the world of psychology and now being a certified positive psychology coach. So taking care of spiritual well-being, emotional well-being, and mental well-being. We move on to social well-being. We're social creatures. We know that living independently with others is critical. We go into environmental well-being. And for me, that's 2 big chunks. One, detoxing your environment. I have a whole life detox that, that everything from decluttering to, what's in your toothpaste. The other side of that is using the elements of the earth to heal. We underestimate maybe the most powerful and free resources on the planet are the sun and the earth and the air and the water, right? So not only what you take away from your environment, but what you add in. And then we go up to intellectual well-being, which is that learning, creativity. We must all evolve our brains and keep them active. And then at the top of our sort of mountain is financial well-being, because if you don't have the financial resources, or you're stressed about safety or food or, basics, it's going to be very hard to be well. And then beyond that is where we say, we kind of built a little mountain. We have a little flag at the top. And then the flag is functional medicine and pills and gadgets and gizmos and all the fun stuff. I don't believe people have to have functional medicine to heal. People think that. I do think it's incredible and it can speed up the process. But if you can't afford it, there's a lot you can do before you feel like you have to go down that road. So I don't know if that helps. That's kind of like our thoughts about that. And your point about which is most important, we have put this in a hierarchy, and we feel like you need to start with your why and then your eating, moving, sleeping. However, the truth is, we encourage everyone just to think about your own life. Give yourself a score from 1 to 10 or 1 to 5 in each of those categories. And then ask yourself where you're scoring lowest. I have a client who has a very serious autoimmune disease. And the number one thing we've done for her so far is she started writing a book. Creativity was the thing her soul needed to really start uplifting her. And maybe for someone else, that's financial well-being. So I'm definitely not going to say beyond that hierarchy, what you need versus someone else needs is maybe not the same thing. We encourage people to develop their own roadmap. The other thing I'll say, because I wrote down like 10 things, because every time you speak, like I'm like, yes.
That's my life.
I wrote down like 10 things. I'm like, oh, he said all this good stuff I want to talk about. But one thing that, as far as how much people need, you touched on, I always think of it, and I have a video somewhere of a bucket, and I label balls with different kinds of stressors, and I filled the bucket. And it was gluten, and it was trauma, and it was all the stuff. And then when that bucket gets full and the balls are spilling over, it's maybe it's a lectin or an oxalate or a stressor, right? And then the balls start spilling out. And so this is how I think of health. It's not just one thing, it's everything in your bucket. And so I had to make maybe 100 changes. I had to make a lot of changes. I think people make 2 or 3 and do astronomically better. So we don't know how many changes each person needs. But the way that I like to think about it is even one change matters. It really matters. If you take one ball out of that bucket, one stressor away, maybe it's your toothpaste is cleaner, you may have less likely for that like bucket to overflow into illness. And if you take out 10 balls, right, and the lower that goes, the more you can chuck a few stressors in there without overflowing your bucket. It's a simple analogy, but it's one that I like because I really believe you make one change and then you make another one and then you make another one, and you will start to, kind of like emptying the bucket of stressors is actually building resilience. Everybody doesn't have to do everything I did. I mean, I did it all. I did a lot. But I don't think everybody has to. But it's hard for us to say again, right? We don't have a crystal ball for your health. I do think people get overwhelmed, like I have to do all this, I can't do it all. I absolutely don't believe that's true. Start with one thing, one change.
I think that's beautifully said. That's actually what I was going to say, is that I think a lot of people, they get into this mindset, like you mentioned, not necessarily needing functional medicine. I think people always feel, and this is for me too, I felt this way, they feel like we need to go to someone to tell us exactly what to do. We want to, I mean, when you're sick and you're desperate, you really just need some guidance. And I think that's appropriate. I think if you can afford that level of guidance, like for me, I work with Dr. Ken Charlin, who's worked with Dr. Terry Wahls. He's a great guy, knows his stuff. If you can afford that route, then take that route if you feel like that's what you need. It's not cheap because insurance, they don't care about this stuff. But what's more important is when you look at functional medicine itself, or working with a coach like you, is that I think a lot of people go into these situations and feel like, okay, I'm going to go see this person and they're going to give me everything I need to know and give me all the pills and stuff like that. And then I'll be good to go and I'll be healed. And it's not necessarily all that case in and of itself, because you need to put in the work. They're really there. You can guide people as much as you want. You can hold their hand, and that's what you're there to do, is help push them and nudge them where they're willing to move, and give them some ideas and some of the foundational building blocks. But those people have to put those actions into motion. And I've had my failures, and everyone will have their failures on this journey. And I think, like you mentioned, you need to know your why you're going into this journey in the first place, because I think a lot of people don't have that very foundational step. And I didn't for a long time. And it kind of manifested itself in this podcast and these discussions. Is I really like helping other people figure out their why, because it's kind of given me my own why. Because for a long time, I felt like I just wanted success or eyeballs. And then once I kind of developed a chronic illness, it became that I am actually thankful I developed some of these problems, because it really gave me that time to look within myself and find in life what I find to be the most important aspects of living. And sometimes it takes a terrible event for you to discover what's truly important, because we live in this go, go, go society of efficiency is everything and wealth is everything. And there's so much more to life than all of those things. So I think, like you mentioned, when you enter this healing journey, finding your why is super important. But maybe you can just mention to the audience, why is having a why to this healing journey so important? And maybe you can tell us what your why was. I'm curious to getting better.
Yeah, it's a great question. I swear sometimes I think we share a brain. I don't know. I don't remember how we connected on social media, but it's almost every day I scroll and I see something and I go, oh my gosh, yes, yes, yes. And it's always you. It's always like one of your posts or something. And like every time you talk, I literally like every time my brain is going, yes, 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 yes. Yeah. So, I mean, when I loved being a psychologist. There was something missing there for me. I liked the corporate world. There was something missing. When I became too disabled to go back to the corporate world, I thought, what is it? 44, what I actually want to do with my life? And I realized that positive psychology was really sort of where I belonged. And I took a class, took some college courses. And they made us read Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. I don't know if you've read that book.
I've heard of that book. I've heard that.
It's an old book. It's a PhD he's a psychologist who survived the Holocaust, and he became really interested in the difference between people who survived and didn't survive, and it didn't have anything to do with their physical health. It had to do with the meaning they made of suffering or the hope that they created. It's a hard book to read, but it really solidified for me, and you'll see it quoted all the time, that one, if you have suffered, the greatest thing you can do is make meaning out of that, which is what you just said. And two, I mean, we have to have a reason for living. Life is hard, period. When you have a chronic illness, life is a nightmare. And even those that love you and live with you and see it you cannot imagine having autoimmunity or cancer, or the things that you have or I have, if you haven't been there. It becomes all consuming. So I think life is hard enough, and then you add a chronic illness. People don't accidentally heal from chronic illness. They simply don't. No one has ever said to me, you know what, I just healed. It doesn't happen that way. It's hard work, and it's sacrifice, and it's commitment, and the whole, there's a million marketers in the world that want you to believe that this is a simple thing. But the honest truth is it's not simple. You have to be committed. You got to make sacrifices. And kind of the analogy that I like to use is, and I've seen this for years, when we love someone, we'll sacrifice anything. If it comes to your spouse and they're chronically ill or they have cancer and you have to make these certain changes, you do it. No questions asked. I don't care what someone asks you to do, what diet or plan or anything to edit your life, you will do it. We have to believe that that we are someone we love enough to do this for. And it's service. We think of self-care as selfish, but self-care is service, because if you don't have your oxygen mask on, you cannot continue to serve those that you love. So if you're declining, and anybody with chronic illness knows, as they decline into disability, they can't do the things with their family or their children or their lives or their purpose that they want to do. So I think we have to get very clear on two things. Why do I want to live? Why do I want to heal? What would it mean to me? What would it mean to the world? What would it mean to my family? We all have a gift, at the highest gift of service, that we were made and created to give to the world. And if we don't give it, and this is Galup research, it'll never be given, because we're that unique. So whether that's raising your family or your volunteer work or the book that you're going to write, or this podcast that you have, or your I think your social media, that is one of the most inspirational things out there. Declining health will rob you of that contribution. So number one, you got to get clear on what is the thing that you can release and unleash into this world the world will be robbed of if health prevents you from doing it. And then I think if you've already suffered, you said, oh, my suffering doesn't compare to yours. And we never compare suffering, never. Your suffering is your suffering. And I think if we deny suffering, we're really doing our bodies a disservice. I think we have to say, I acknowledge that you're suffering and I'm here with you. So there's no comparison. It's okay that you've suffered and it's different than mine. That doesn't make it any more or less. So I think we have to say, okay, it doesn't matter why I've suffered. What is the meaning I'm going to make it of it? And I think those are intertwined for me. My why at first was, I was 44 and I had found the thing I wanted to do in life, which was positive psychology. And I didn't want to lose the chance to actually have my dream career. And to help people. I wanted to look back on my life and say I made a difference in people's lives. As my autoimmunity evolved and then I got cancer, my why really has become this, that there is hope for healing. Number one, fundamentally, because if you don't have hope, you're going to heal. You're not going to. Nobody ever healed and said, I had no hope, ever. Starts with hope every time. Here. And then, you've got to say, okay, I got a reason that I want to work for it. And I'm willing to do so. And so for me, it's helping other people. I don't want to leave legacy. I don't need people to remember me when I'm gone. All I want to do is help. Like if somebody came to me and said, and they do, you've helped my health here and now today, that my life was worth living. And not only that, if you ask me, would you go through it again? Would you go through all of the stuff you've been through? Would you go through the cancer, all of it again? My answer is always going to be yes. I would do it again and again and again if I can make meaning of that, if I can save somebody else some suffering, if I can help them get their purpose into the world. Even if it's one person, then yes, I will accept it again and again and again as a blessing. Part of my path. I think I think that has to be, that mental shift has to be the first step of any journey to well-being.
Yeah, that's 100% true. And that's something that I, if I'm going to be frank, was not part of my healing journey in the beginning. Is I really struggled with the mental part of healing and finding acceptance and forgiving myself for past inflictions. Like I've talked on the podcast before, I've suffered for years with eating disorder tendencies, and I never really forgave myself for doing those things up until probably even the last few months. I'm probably, as much as I like to preach things, I do that because I need to hear it in order to live it. I feel like my reason to like live out the things I say is by posting it on my social media, because that makes me then accountable to living up to those expectations that I put out. And I feel like if I didn't put them out, even if I'm not 100% there mentally, then it'll push me to continue to better myself. And I think it's really important what you said, that it all does start with your willingness and your why, and in here, the mental aspect of it, which is often the most difficult part for people to tackle, and knowingly so. And so that's why I say that I'm like the first to admit that I'm still constantly working on those aspects of my personality and my being, because they're the most difficult to overcome. And I think anyone can attest to that, even yourself.
Yeah.
But I think what people really want to hear and dive into is this food is medicine idea. Because if you go into the standard medical community, I think it's becoming more accepted as far as like diet and nutrition. I think more doctors are starting to pick up some of this stuff, but they're not necessarily trained in all of these things in medical school. And that's something Terry Wahls was pretty adamant about. Like in her training back in medical school, she didn't do a lot of nutritional training. That all came after she developed MS and had to do all this research into the basic science and finding all these things about mitochondria, and then coming out with Minding My Mitochondria book and all this stuff. So I think, like you mentioned, it can get really complicated really, really fast when we talk about any of this stuff, whether it's biohacking or food. So you also mentioned that you can do a lot of these things and implement these changes without having to seek out really professional help. It's about the foundational stuff, and it really should be about that. Once you kind of get past all the haze and the dogmatic stuff, and you kind of think about it clearly and concisely, just think about what are humans, meant to eat. That's kind of what I went back to in my healing journey a little bit. But what are the kind of the Wahls basics, or the basics that you implement in your own nutritional therapy program with people that you make a hard defining rule for people to follow in the very beginning when they're struggling, or they're coming from the standard American diet, or they don't know where to start?
So that's a great question, but there's a little tick in my brain. If I can just go like one step back first.
Yeah.
You said something, and I think it's well worth saying that when I started, when I was so stubborn about making these changes, I had to do some meditations and talk to a therapist about why. And what we uncovered is my greatest fear. I mean, we're fear-based creatures. My greatest fear was hope. I was terrified to hope that these changes could help me, because it was the last road. And if they didn't, I thought I would die. And so it's okay, as we talk about hope, to be terrified, to have hope. And so you may need a therapist to get there, and that is okay. So don't just think like, oh, this hope thing scares me. That's okay. That's pretty normal. And the other thing I just want to just throw in there, because I just feel like I have to, somebody sent me an article called "Your Brain is Not for Thinking," and it was so amazing. I immediately purchased the book. I haven't read it yet, but I knew it, but it really put the science behind it, that our bodies, our brains aren't for thinking, they're for survival. Everything we do has a subconscious survival reason. And even if that ends up not serving us or not serving us well, it's easier, I think, to forgive ourselves for some of our actions if we understand that somewhere our body thought it was trying to serve us. And it's okay, whatever it did. Sometimes we just need to reprogram. But I think we can let go of, hey, that was my subconscious really trying there to do something good for me. And it either stopped serving me or went off the rails somewhere. But I do think we have to remove shame for all of that.
Yeah.
All of that. Okay. So food. So, and I do just want to clarify, I'm not a nutritional therapy associate, but I am certified through Wahls and Bulletproof and some other. What strikes me is I can't say that everybody has to be on this diet. I never say you have to go to bed at this time and sleep this many hours and be on this diet, because it doesn't work that way. First of all, you have to be on the diet that you're willing to follow, or you go gluten-free and you eat gluten once a week, you're not gluten-free. Just forget about it, right? Because it's so inflammatory. If it's inflammatory to you, it's inflaming you for months on end, and that little 1% is 100% inflammation. So that's not a judgment, but like if you just can't go gluten-free, then let's talk about something else. So what I think is so interesting is the books that resonate most with me, the people that I read said these people know what they're talking about. Terry Wahls, Masha Winters, Metabolic Approach to Cancer, Wahls Protocol, Jonathan Baylor, Sane Diet, Bulletproof, all have the exact same foundational principles. You need to eat somewhere between 6 to 12 cups of vegetables a day, and they need to be different categories. You need protein, you need animal protein. You need to minimize, probably grains and higher glycemic foods. And I do think that paleo ancestral living and food make the most sense. So I really feel like any of those diets are okay, whether, Bulletproof if you want to be high performance, Wahls if you have autoimmunity, maybe the same diet if you want to lose weight, certainly if you've ever had cancer, the Metabolic Approach to Cancer, they're all real similar. It just, it's so simple and it's so complicated. It comes down to eat real food, eat vegetables, lots and lots of vegetables, eat plants, eat some protein, and then add, depending on your glucose, your lab values, your weight, then you need to start designing what carb and how much, what fruit and how much. You just need to minimize anything that comes in a box, anything that isn't a real food. If you're going to have almond milk, look for water, almonds, and sea salt, right? If there's got, 10 things if you can't pronounce it, don't put it in your body or on your body. So, it's not the same for everyone. And I know you're the same way because we're really strategic thinkers, and I consider myself a health strategist, and I think you're the same. I say, if you can't hire a coach or you can't get help, get a book like the Wahls Protocol for $15 and just start doing it. And then if you need troubleshooting, there are a million free Facebook groups. I run a free Facebook group. Go in there and just start asking people for assistance and help. And then if you really need a coach, you can get a coach, but know that there is no one size fits all template. All templates need to be customized. I hear people so often say, I can't do the protocol because I can't have high oxalates. I can't have saturated fat. It can be customized to anything, anybody. I think there's special cases for things like eating disorders. I think you need to work with a therapist or a specialty nutritionist in those cases. I don't think that you need to do something that's going to trigger, an eating disorder further. So I think that but even then, nutrition can be customized. I think people need to know, if you can't do A, B, or C, D, that doesn't mean you can't heal. If you can't do it exactly this way, that in no way means you can't heal. I love listening to Dr. Terry Wahls speak. I love it because she'll always say things like, oh no, I had this person and, she started all of her patients on the protocol were at the VA. They were on food stamps. They ate everything out of a can. They ate everything out of the dried bin. And she had people healing all the time. So this is not about perfection at all.
No, I think that's such a brilliant point, because I think that's a problem that people go into all these things with, is that they think or they get upset when something doesn't work. And this is kind of where the persistence game comes into play. Like you said, your story is actually probably one of the most noteworthy as far as the persistent game goes, because you went into this and you're like, you know what, I'm going to do this for 5 years and just see how it goes. But that's the thing, is like, some people will do this for 30 days if they're really lucky, because a lot of people can't follow something for more than a few days. I tried to get my parents to cut out vegetable oils like sunflower, safflower, all these really high omega-6 oils that are found in like ultra processed food. So basically I was just trying to get them to not eat as much processed food. And within 3 days, it's like, boom, back at it. Can't do it. Right. And so it's not easy. It's not easy. So that's why giving yourself some grace too, like we mentioned before, is really important, because it's a process. But it does, like, you're not going to fix like things necessarily. Like you mentioned, one person's healing journey isn't necessarily applicable to somebody else's healing journey, because we're all coming from different baselines, different toxicity loads, different genetics, different backgrounds, different, all this stuff. And so it's really about listening to your own body, figuring out, troubleshooting. You're going to mess up. I've done it a lot. I messed up today. I had coffee and I'm feeling it now, but I was just like, I needed it. It's one of my pet peeves I got to work on.
If I can say, if I can invite you into getting rid of the messed up language and invite you into, I learned something today. Even if you suspected it wasn't going to do you well, you tried it and you learned it didn't do you well. It's such a better mindset than you messed up, because this is a learning journey. And you know what? Almost 100% of things we don't tolerate, we can gain tolerance to. So you're testing your tolerance. You're still not tolerating it. I don't think that means you messed up. I think that means you said, okay, I learned I can't tolerate it yet.
Yeah, no, I think that's also very important. And that's still probably one of the worst areas that I'm still working on. It's one of my largest deficits is the way I word things. And that's purely because I was always a kid in school who wanted to be like the class clown. And this is where, through this healing journey, I've kind of dug up all these insecurities and stuff that really were the dominoes that contributed to my eating disorder development. And then probably the development of where I am at now is just this constant, and a lot of people have this negativity talk all the time.
Almost everyone.
Yeah. And I play it off, or have played it off, as sort of self-deprecative humor, which, if you watch a lot of comedians, have that. And a lot of comedians suffer from a lot of mental distress and all these things. But the way you think about things, like you mentioned before, is really important too. So the way you think about your healing journey and your mistakes is imperative to how you move forward. So I think that is a very good point that you brought up. But another thing that I kind of wanted to get into is, so we kind of talked about laying out the fundamentals of the diet and stuff like that. And then you have these 7 pillars that you mentioned before. One of these pillars is definitely going to be your toxic load, which is a whole chapter in the Wahls Protocol book in and of itself. And when I think of environmental, toxic exposure, sure, we can talk about like chemicals or like the lotions we put on or the shampoo that we put on, or just like the air quality of where we live and all this stuff. But I think another thing is the people and the social environment that we put ourselves in every day, or the work environment. And so maybe you could kind of give us a little insight into your thoughts around not only just the standard things we think of, like toxins, like heavy metals and all that stuff, but kind of just the social environments that we put ourselves in, because I think those contribute equally, if not more, because we don't think about them right away.
You mean social toxicity?
Yeah.
You mean, yeah. Yeah, it's funny. I really practice what I preach. And I'm sorry, I'm laughing because my cat keeps pushing my computer further and further. It's like towards the floor. It's everything's moving around. It's my cat behind the screen.
It's always an adventure on the podcast.
Yeah. I made diet changes first. And by the way, that 5-year thing, that's Terry Wahls. She has in her book how long it takes cells to heal. So I said, well, then I'll give my, cells time to heal. But and then I did, exercise, and then I did sleep hacking, and then I did, XYZ. And so it was like 3 or 4 years of my journey before I really sort of did the social relationship hacking. And that's okay. That's what I was talking about, one change at a time. I did what I call the life detox. I sat down and I said, what are the toxins in my environment? And they were clutter, like physical clutter, and they were thought clutter, negative thoughts, and negative things, negative activities, and negative people. And social detox was maybe the hardest thing I've ever done, because I'm a people pleaser, never want to hurt anybody's feelings. So I had to really say, with intention, just like I do what I put into my body, who do I interact with? Who will I spend time with? Who will I pick up the phone for? Who will I respond to? Which meetings will I attend? What social activities? That was very hard. Learning to say no was very hard. And one of the best tips I ever got was, you don't need an explanation. Just say, I'd love to, but I can't, or I'm sorry, I can't make it. Over time, most of the people in my life, I sort of shed away because my time could be better spent. And what I realized is, when I got rid of all the miscellaneous people that didn't serve me best, and that may sound harsh, I had time to spend time with the people that I love the most, my closest friends and family, which for me is a very small circle. I'm very much an introvert. So I think saying no can be hard. People pleasing can be hard, but the bottom line is, we have to choose our relationships and our time commitments with as much care and concern as we choose our food or our toothpaste or anything else in our life. It's equally important. This is a special love of mine because I'm actually certified in 2 positive psychology coaching paradigms that are all about independent communication. In fact, they say every aspect of our life is rooted in interdependence, because we're so interdependent on others. Everything you eat, how many people we're involved in that, from the farming to the processing to the delivery, right? So even our well-being is impacted by how we interact with the person bagging our groceries. So I'm taking that interdependence paradigm and also learning to apply it to our bodies. Like, what is our mind-body interdependent relationship look like? But you're right. Your relationship well-being, your social well-being is as important as anything else that you do. And can be, can contribute to your well-being or completely erode it. I study a particular model of strengths where we use our strengths to understand what are our triggers, where do we mismatch and miscommunicate with people. So, there's that I could talk about for years and years and years, but there are help for things like that as well. All frustrations and fulfillments are rooted sort of in our innate personality, but sure, editing your life, editing your relationships with intention is important. And then for those that you can't edit, if there's frustrations and miscommunications, learning to navigate that is a huge part of well-being. I don't know if that was the question.
No, that was actually perfect. And I guarantee you, I could talk with you probably for hours and we would never stop.
For sure.
Unfortunately, the attention spans of viewers is not as long as mine. So I do kind of want to, we definitely will do a part 2 because there's so much I'd love to dive in with you in the future. But you mentioned, I should say, at the very beginning of the podcast, partway in, this kind of analogy of the bucket. And over time, we've filled up this bucket with various problems, exposures, all this stuff. And it only takes one more little ball to start coming off and flooding over the bucket of tolerance. And then that's when you start developing autoimmunity and symptoms and all these things. If someone out there listening right now can take away one thing from this awesome discussion that we've been having, what would be one of these balls to take out and start addressing that you think someone should just start with right now? And I know we talked about a lot. It could be any one of them. But what would be one that you think would be kind of a good starting point for someone that's just kind of out there trying to figure it out right now?
So here's where you're going to know that I'm a coach first and foremost, because my answer is going to be, everyone listening probably knows the answer better than me. The best lesson I ever learned as a coach came from Dr. Mark Atkinson, who's the medical director of Bulletproof, who's maybe one of the best coaches on the planet. And he said, when I coach clients on health, and I get their whole health history and everything they want, and I make a list of ideas that I think will help them, and then I ask them, what are 2 or 3 things that you think you can do? He said the answer is 100% of the time better than what I came up with. So what I would invite people to do is to sit and do some deep belly breaths and just meditate on this and ask your own body. In fact, there's a wonderful exercise, and I can maybe make a video and put it on my social media, called the future self, where you envision yourself 5 years from now. And the simplest thing to do, close your eyes, deep belly breathe, see yourself 5 years from now, envision that you're waving, you're radiant, you're smiling, you're happy, and ask yourself, what is the first thing you did to get to that healthier future? And I promise you, your intuition will tell you, make a diet change, sleep better, let go of stress, deal with this negative thing, get treatment for trauma, stop eating gluten. I mean, I truly believe, because I'm a coach at heart, that the listeners will know better if they listen to themselves than anything that I could say. It's this one thing.
That's so very true. I mean, I went through this very same experience with my like health coach and functional medicine practitioner. And I knew exactly where I want to start. And usually the place where you know intuitively where you need to start is kind of the last place you want to go.
Yes, because there's fear, right? Because it's always going to be, what if it doesn't work? Like, what if this thing that I really think will work and then it doesn't work, and I sort of lose my tether to hope. So that's okay that it's scary.
Exactly. And it goes back to what you said. A lot of people are scared of hope, and that's okay. Mm-hmm. To be scared of hope, but also having hope is imperative to healing. Mm-hmm. No one is healed without having some level of hope. And I really appreciate people like you, because I think you're giving people hope. So where can people find you, reach out to you, find your stuff, look at your awesome Instagram page, which makes me hungry every day?
Yeah. So, and again, I always have to add more because I have a mouth that never stops. I just want to say how much I love you. Like, I truly love you. I think first of all, you're hysterical. You're incredibly, you're incredibly intelligent. You have so much wisdom. I find your output some of the most inspirational health output out there. And so I do just want to tell you that you inspire me, and I think you are amazing. Like, I want to grow up and be you. So I just adore you, and I adore what you put out there. So
I'm going to cry after this.
Listen, you really are amazing. And what you're putting out into the world it matters, and it's making a difference, and it's amazing. You are amazing.
Well,
so I want to say that first. So right now people can just find me at Instagram or Facebook at autoimmune foodie. That's just my hobby account. I started, got a lot of followers. You can subscribe to my email at autoimmunefoodie.com. The exciting thing is I'm launching a series of classes on my biohacking model about how you can do it yourself and plan your own roadmap without, having a coach. That is going to be called the Lead Yourself to Health program. That is like the thing that I want to give the world the most. I'm partnering with my fabulous coach partner, Bianca Capo. So if you want to just follow me at Autoimmune Foodie, either by email or on my social media, we will let you know when those materials are available. But we're very excited to help people biohack their own biology.